Standing there in the rain at Green Lawn Cemetery, listening to my brother Daniel tell me I wasn't family anymore, I never imagined that one phone call would change everything. For 32 years, I'd been the black sheep, the disappointment, the sister who chose art over accounting, who lived in a cramped studio instead of a mansion, who would never understand real success according to them. But sometimes the people who underestimate you the most are the ones who give you the greatest motivation to prove them wrong. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The call came at 6 in the morning on a Tuesday. I was in my studio apartment in Brooklyn, coffee still brewing, paintbrush in my hand as I worked on a piece that had kept me up most of the night. The number on my phone showed my stepmother Patricia's contact, which was strange since we barely spoke outside of obligatory holiday exchanges. Sarah, her voice was tight, controlled in that way she perfected over the years. Your father passed away last night, heart attack. The funeral is Friday at St. Matthew's, 2 o'clock. No condolences, no asking how I was handling the news, just the facts delivered like a business memo. Classic Patricia. I set down my brush, the abstract landscape I'd been working on suddenly seeming insignificant against the weight of mortality. I'll be there. I managed, though she'd already hung up. My father, Robert Castillo, had been a force of nature in the construction industry. Castillo Development had built half the commercial buildings in downtown Phoenix, and Robert had built his reputation on being tougher than the Arizona sun. He was also the man who told me at 18 that art was a hobby, not a career, and that I'd better find something practical to do with my life before I embarrassed the family name. I hadn't spoken to him in 3 years. The last conversation we'd had was at Daniel's wedding, where my father cornered me during the reception and asked when I planned to stop playing with paints and get a real job. When I told him my gallery show had sold out the month before, he laughed and said luck wasn't a business plan. That was the night I decided I was done trying to earn his respect. The flight to Phoenix felt longer than usual. I stared out the window at the desert landscape, remembering how I used to love painting those endless horizons as a child. My father would find me on the back patio with my watercolors, capturing the way the mountains looked purple in the sunset, and he'd ruffle my hair and call me his little artist. Somewhere along the way, that affection turned to disappointment, and my dreams became obstacles to his vision of what his daughter should be. I rented a modest sedan at the airport, the kind of practical car that wouldn't draw attention or judgment from my family. 3 years of successful gallery shows had afforded me better options, but I'd learned long ago that displays of success only made family gatherings more complicated. Better to let them maintain their assumptions about my struggling artist lifestyle than deal with the questions and skepticism that came with revealing the truth. The funeral home was exactly what I expected: somber, expensive, and full of people who knew my father as a business titan rather than the complicated man who raised me. I arrived early, hoping to have a few quiet moments before facing the family dynamics that came with Patricia and my half-brothers. Daniel was already there, of course. At 28, he'd slipped seamlessly into the role of heir apparent at Castillo Development. Everything about him screamed success, from his tailored suit to his perfectly styled hair to the way he commanded attention when he walked into a room. He was everything my father had wanted in a child, and he'd never let me forget it. Standing beside him was Marcus, 2 years younger and equally polished. Where Daniel had inherited my father's business acumen, Marcus had gotten his charisma. He could sell ice to an Eskimo, my father used to say with pride. Both of them had graduated from Arizona State with business degrees. Both had started at the company immediately after college, and both had never questioned whether there might be other paths to success. Sarah. Daniel's greeting was cool but civil. You made it. Of course I made it. He was my father too. Could have fooled me, Marcus said under his breath. Not quite quietly enough. I chose to ignore the barb. Grief made people say things they didn't mean, and I wasn't interested in starting drama at our father's funeral. Patricia approached, draped in black designer clothing that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She'd been my father's wife for 15 years, ever since my mother died of cancer when I was 17, and she'd never quite known what to do with the artistic daughter who didn't fit into her carefully curated family image. Sarah, dear. She offered the kind of hug that barely made contact, more performance than comfort. I'm so glad you could make it. I wasn't sure with your busy schedule. My busy schedule. As if painting was some casual hobby that kept me mildly occupied between more important activities. I'd stopped trying to explain my work to Patricia years ago. She existed in a world where success was measured in square footage and stock portfolios, not gallery walls and critical reviews. I wouldn't have missed it, I said simply. The service was elegant and impersonal, filled with speeches from business associates and golf partners who spoke about my father's professional achievements and charitable contributions. Daniel gave a eulogy that painted him as a mentor and visionary, which wasn't wrong exactly, but felt incomplete. Missing were the stories about the man who taught me to fish, who drove me to art classes even when he didn't understand why I wanted to take them, who used to sneak me extra dessert when Patricia wasn't looking. I sat in the second row, behind Patricia and my brothers, feeling like a stranger at my own father's goodbye. When they asked if anyone else wanted to share memories, I almost stood up. Almost spoke about the father who encouraged my creativity before the world convinced him it wasn't practical. But the moment passed, and I let them maintain their version of who Robert Castillo had been. The burial was at Greenlawn Cemetery, an exclusive place where Phoenix's elite secured their final resting places. The rain that had threatened all morning finally began, light at first, then steadier as we gathered around the gravesite. Arizona rain was rare enough to feel significant, as if even the weather wanted to mark the occasion. Patricia held herself together with the same composure she'd maintained throughout the service. Daniel and Marcus flanked her like bodyguards, protecting the family patriarch from any displays of emotion that might seem inappropriate. I stood slightly apart, not excluded exactly, but not quite included either. After the final prayers and the symbolic handful of dirt, people began to disperse. Some headed to their cars immediately, eager to escape the weather. Others lingered in small groups, sharing final condolences and making plans for the reception at the country club. I was preparing to leave when Daniel approached me, his expression harder than it had been during the service. "We need to talk," he said. "About what?" "About Dad's will. About the company. About your expectations." There was something in his tone that put me immediately on guard. "I don't have any expectations, Daniel. I never wanted anything from the business." "Good, because you're not getting anything." The bluntness of it caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" Marcus had joined us now, forming a small circle near my father's grave, while other mourners continued their conversations nearby. Patricia was watching from a distance, her face unreadable. "Dad left everything to us," Daniel continued. "The company, the house, the investments, everything goes to family. I am family. Are you?" Marcus stepped closer, his voice low but carrying an edge I'd never heard before. "When's the last time you—"
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
"Called him? When's the last time you showed any interest in his life, his work, his health? When's the last time he showed interest in mine?" The words came out sharper than I intended, but I was tired of being painted as the negligent daughter when the distance had been mutual. "You walked away," Daniel said. "You decided you were too good for us, too artistic and pure to be part of what he built. So congratulations, you got what you wanted. You're free to live your bohemian lifestyle without any burdens from the family business." The rain was getting heavier, but none of us moved. Other mourners were rushing to their cars, but we stood there in the weather, finally having the conversation we'd been avoiding for years. "I never said I was too good for anything," I said. "I just wanted to pursue my own path." "Your own path?" Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Living in New York, playing artist, expecting the family safety net to always be there when your little hobby doesn't work out." "It's not a hobby." "Right, it's a career," Daniel said sarcastically. "How's that working out for you? Because from where we stand, it looks like you're 32 years old, with nothing to show for it except some paintings that hang in coffee shops." Each word was designed to cut, and they found their target. These were fears I'd wrestled with during the lean early years, doubts I'd overcome through persistence and gradual success. But hearing them voiced by my brothers, at my father's grave, brought back every insecurity I thought I'd conquered. "You don't know anything about my life," I said quietly. We know enough, Marcus replied. We know you've been scraping by for years. We know you live in a studio apartment and drive a car that's older than some of our employees. Kids, we know you haven't built anything real or lasting or valuable, unlike you two, who had everything handed to you. We earned our positions. Daniel's voice rose slightly, drawing glances from the remaining mourners. We worked for Dad, learned the business, proved ourselves worthy of inheriting what he built. You disappeared to chase some fantasy about being an artist. And now you want back in, Marcus added. Now that Dad's gone and there's money on the table, suddenly you care about family again. That's not why I'm here. Isn't it? Daniel studied my face like he was reading a business proposal he didn't trust. Because Patricia told us you've been asking questions about the estate. I looked toward Patricia, who was still watching our conversation from her position near the funeral director. I hadn't asked her any questions about money or inheritance. I'd barely spoken to her beyond basic funeral arrangements. I haven't asked about anything. She said you seemed very interested in the financial details when she called you about the service. She called to tell me Dad died. I said I'd be here for the funeral. That's all. But I could see they'd already constructed their narrative. The struggling artist's daughter who swooped in after her wealthy father's death, suddenly interested in family after years of distance. It was a story that fit their view of me. And facts weren't going to change their minds. Look, Sarah. Daniel's tone shifted, becoming the voice he probably used in business negotiations. I'm going to be straight with you. Dad's will is very clear. Everything goes to his sons and his wife. His legitimate family. People who were actually part of his life. I'm his daughter. Biologically, sure. But family is about more than DNA. It's about loyalty, about showing up, about being there when people need you. When's the last time you did any of those things? The accusation stung because it carried a grain of truth. I had pulled away from them, but it hadn't been abandonment. It had been self-preservation. Every family gathering had become an interrogation about my choices. Every conversation a reminder of how I'd disappointed them. Eventually, it became easier to stay away than to endure the constant judgment. I'm tired of this conversation, I said, starting to turn away. We're not done. Marcus caught my arm, not roughly, but firmly enough to stop me. There's something else you need to understand. I pulled my arm free, stepping back. The rain was soaking through my jacket now, and I wanted nothing more than to get to my car and drive away from this cemetery. This city. This family that had never quite known what to do with me. What? Daniel exchanged a look with Marcus, some silent communication passing between them. When he spoke again, his voice carried a finality that made my stomach clench. You're not family anymore. The words hung in the rain-soaked air between us. Other mourners were still within earshot, but their conversations had grown quieter, as if they sensed the drama playing out near the gravesite. What did you say? You heard me, Daniel continued, his voice steady and certain. Dad's gone, and with him, any obligation we had to pretend this relationship works. You made your choice years ago. You chose your art over your family. You chose independence over belonging. So now you get what you wanted. Complete independence. You can't just declare someone not family. Actually, we can, Marcus said. Legally, financially, practically. You're not in the will. You're not part of the business. You have no stake in anything Dad built. As far as we're concerned, you're just someone who used to live in our house. I felt something cold settling in my chest. And it wasn't just the rain. This wasn't grief talking or stress from funeral arrangements. This was calculated, planned. They'd discussed this, decided on this course of action before I'd even arrived in Phoenix. Patricia agrees, Daniel added, as if reading my thoughts. She thinks it's for the best. Clean breaks are easier for everyone. I looked again toward Patricia, who was now being helped into a black sedan by the funeral director. She didn't look back at us, didn't acknowledge the conversation that was effectively erasing me from the family she'd helped create. You're serious about this. Dead serious, Marcus said, and the pun felt intentional. Consider this your official notice. Don't expect Christmas cards. Don't expect wedding invitations. Don't expect anything from us ever again. The finality of it was breathtaking. 32 years of family history, dismissed in a cemetery conversation. Every shared memory, every childhood experience, every moment of connection we'd ever had, reduced to nothing because I'd chosen a different path than the one they'd laid out for me. And if I contest the will? With what money? Daniel's smile was sharp. Legal challenges are expensive, Sarah. You'd need to prove undue influence or mental incapacity, and good luck with that. Dad was sharp as a tack right up until the end, and plenty of people can testify to that. You'd bankrupt yourself trying to fight us, and you'd lose anyway. Besides, Marcus added, what would you even be fighting for? You never wanted to be part of the business. You never showed interest in Dad's investments. You walked away from all of this years ago, remember? They were right about one thing. I had walked away. But I'd walked away from their judgment and their narrow definition of success, not from my father himself. The distinction mattered to me, even if it didn't matter to them. So that's it, I said. 15 years as your sister, just erased. Half-sister, Daniel corrected, and only because Dad married your mother. We were never really family, Sarah. We were just people who lived in the same house for a while. The cruelty of it took my breath away. We'd shared holidays, vacations, childhood adventures. I'd helped Marcus with his homework, taught Daniel how to paint watercolor sunsets, been there for both of them through teenage heartbreaks and college stress. Apparently, none of that had meant anything to them. I see, I said quietly. Good, Marcus said. Then we understand each other. Oh, we understand each other perfectly. Something in my tone made Daniel's expression shift slightly, but I was already reaching for my phone. The rain was coming down harder now, and most of the other mourners had fled to their cars. We were essentially alone in the cemetery, which was probably for the best. What are you doing? Daniel asked as I scrolled through my contacts. Making a phone call. To who? I found the number I was looking for and pressed dial. It rang once, twice. Then a familiar voice answered. Margaret Chen's office, this is Jennifer. Jennifer, it's Sarah Castillo. Is Margaret available? It's urgent. One moment, please. Daniel and Marcus were watching me with growing confusion, clearly not understanding why I was making business calls at their father's funeral. They probably assumed I was calling a friend for emotional support, or maybe a therapist to help me process their rejection. Sarah? Margaret's voice came through clearly despite the rain. I'm so sorry about your father. How are you holding up? I've been better, I said honestly. Margaret, I need to ask you something, and I need a straight answer. Of course. What can I do for you? The Phoenix acquisition we discussed last month. The one you said we should move on quickly. Are you still confident it's a good investment? There was a brief pause. Absolutely. The market analysis shows tremendous growth potential, and the target company is undervalued by at least 40%. Why do you ask? Daniel's face had gone pale. Marcus was staring at me like I'd started speaking a foreign language. Because I want to move forward with it. Today. All cash offer, 20% above asking price. Sarah, that's a $75 million acquisition. I know what it costs, Margaret. You want to make an all-cash offer for $75 million while standing at your father's funeral? Actually, I'm standing at his gravesite. But yes, that's exactly what I want to do. Another pause, longer this time. Margaret Chen was one of the most respected investment advisors on the West Coast, and she'd been handling my portfolio for 3 years. She was used to my unconventional timing and quick decisions, but this was probably a first even for her. All right, she said finally. I'll draft the paperwork and have it ready for your signature within the hour. Should I use the standard acquisition structure? Standard structure. Expedited timeline. I want to close before the end of the week. That's aggressive, but doable. I'll make the calls. One more thing, Margaret. Yes? The target company is Castillo Development. The silence on the phone was deafening. Even Margaret, who'd negotiated billion-dollar deals without blinking, seemed stunned by this revelation. Sarah, she said carefully, are you absolutely certain about this? I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Your emotional state might be affecting your judgment. Perhaps we should discuss this when you've had time to process your grief. I looked at Daniel and Marcus, who were standing frozen in the rain, their faces reflecting a mixture of confusion and growing alarm. My judgment is perfectly clear, Margaret. I want to buy my family's company. All right then. I'll get started immediately. I ended the call and slipped my phone back into my pocket. The cemetery had grown quiet except for the sound of rain on headstones and the distant rumble of thunder. My brothers looked like they'd been struck by lightning themselves. "What did you just do?" Daniel's voice was barely above a whisper. "I made a phone call," I said simply, "like you suggested. You can't buy our company. Actually, I can. Margaret Chen is one of the best investment advisors in the country, and she's been managing my portfolio since I got serious about building wealth. Castillo Development has been on our radar for months as an undervalued acquisition target." Marcus was shaking his head like he could make my words disappear through denial. "You don't have that kind of money." "Don't I?" "You live in a studio apartment," Daniel said desperately. "You drive a 15-year-old Honda. You shop at thrift stores. Because I choose to. Because I learned early that displays of wealth make people treat you differently. And I wanted to earn respect for my work, not my bank account." The rain was turning their perfectly styled hair into damp mess, but neither of them seemed to notice. They were too busy recalculating everything they thought they knew about their half-sister. "Even if you have some money," Marcus said, "you don't have $75 million. "You're right," I agreed. "I don't have $75 million. Relief flickered across their faces. "I have significantly more than that." The relief died instantly. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. "Preliminary offer submitted. Target Company's board is meeting an emergency session. We'll have response within 2 hours." I showed them the message. "Preliminary offer submitted. Looks like your board is taking this seriously." "This is insane," Daniel said. "Where did you get this money?" "I earned it." "Selling paintings?" "Among other things." I turned to face them fully, no longer the dismissed daughter or struggling artist they'd spent years pitying. "You want to know what I've been doing for the past decade, while you two were learning how to run Dad's business? I was learning how to build my own. That's impossible. 5 years ago, I sold a painting to a tech entrepreneur for $50,000. Not because it was worth that much, but because he liked the way it looked in his office. We got to talking, and he mentioned he was developing an app for art collectors. I invested my savings, $20,000, for a 5% stake. They were listening now, their attention complete despite the rain soaking through their expensive suits. The app sold to a major auction house 18 months later for $40 million. My 5% became $2 million overnight. Daniel's face had gone completely white. "You never said anything. You never asked. Besides, I was just getting started." I took that $2 million and started investing in other early-stage companies. Tech startups, sustainable fashion brands, artisanal food companies. I had an eye for businesses that combined creativity with commercial viability. "That doesn't add up to $75 million, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. "You're right again. The big breakthrough came 3 years ago when I invested in a virtual reality company that was developing platforms for immersive art experiences. I put in $5 million for a 20% stake." My phone buzzed again. Another text from Margaret. "Board has accepted preliminary offer pending due diligence. Legal team is standing by." "Facebook bought them last year for $400 million, I continued. My 20% became $80 million. After taxes, I netted about $65 million. The silence was complete now except for the rain. Even the distant sound of traffic seemed to have stopped. But I didn't stop there, I said. I kept investing, kept building. Real estate, technology, sustainable energy, art authentication services. My portfolio is worth about $150 million now. Conservative estimate. $150 million, Daniel repeated numbly. give or take. Margaret handles the details, but the quarterly reports are always encouraging. Marcus was staring at me like I'd revealed I was an alien from another planet. Why are you telling us this now? Because you just disowned me at my father's funeral. Because you declared that I'm not family anymore. Because you decided that my life's work was worthless, and my success was imaginary. I stepped closer to them, close enough that they could see the determination in my eyes. And because I want you to understand exactly what you just lost. My phone rang. Margaret again. Sarah, this is moving faster than I expected. The board has voted to accept your offer, pending final due diligence and approval from the primary shareholders. How long will that take? Under normal circumstances, 2 to 3 weeks. But given your timeline requirements and the premium you're offering, I think we can expedite to 72 hours. Perfect. Draw up the paperwork. There's one more thing, Margaret said. The company's current management team is requesting a meeting with you before the sale finalizes. They want to discuss transition plans and leadership structure. I looked at Daniel and Marcus, who were hanging on every word of my conversation. Tell them I'll meet with the leadership team tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. at my hotel. Which hotel? The Phoenician. Presidential suite. I'll arrange everything. Sarah, I have to ask again. Are you absolutely certain about this acquisition? Margaret, I've never been more certain of anything. After I hung up, the three of us stood in the rain without speaking. The cemetery was completely empty now, except for maintenance workers beginning to pack up chairs and clean up from the service. You're buying our company, Daniel said finally. Yes, our father's company. It will be my company as of Friday, assuming the due diligence doesn't reveal any major problems. And then what? Marcus asked. You fire us? Shut everything down? Destroy what Dad built? That depends. On what? On whether you want to keep working for me. The offer hung between us like a challenge. These two men who had just declared me unworthy of family status were now facing the possibility of becoming my employees. You can't be serious, Daniel said. I'm very serious. Castillo Development is a well-run company with strong market position and excellent growth potential. I'm not buying it for revenge, Daniel. I'm buying it because it's a good investment. But we just told you. You just told me I'm not family anymore. You made that very clear. But business is business, and you're both competent executives who know the company better than anyone. If you can work for me the way you worked for Dad, there's no reason to make personnel changes. Marcus was shaking his head slowly. This is unreal. What's unreal is that you thought you could erase me from this family without consequences. What's unreal is that you spent years dismissing my choices and my success without ever bothering to learn what I'd actually accomplished. I pulled out my car keys, ready to leave them standing in the rain with their shattered assumptions. Wait, Daniel called after me. What if we don't want to work for you? I paused, turning back to face them one last time. Then you'll have to find new jobs. But I should mention that I'll be implementing some changes to company policy immediately after the acquisition closes. What kind of changes? Well, for starters, Castillo Development will be establishing an arts foundation to support emerging artists in the Phoenix area. We'll be renovating the lobby to showcase local artwork, and we'll be partnering with galleries and art schools to provide exhibition opportunities. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. The company that had been built by a man who considered art frivolous would now be championing artistic expression under the ownership of his artist daughter. Additionally, I continued, we'll be implementing profit-sharing programs for all employees, not just management. And we'll be establishing scholarship funds for employees, children who want to pursue creative careers. Dad would hate that, Marcus said quietly. Dad's dead, I replied. And according to you, I'm not family anyway, so what Dad would have wanted is no longer relevant. I started walking toward my rental car, leaving them standing beside his grave. The rain was letting up slightly, but they were both soaked through. Their expensive suits would probably be ruined, but that seemed appropriate somehow. Sarah, Daniel called after me one more time. I stopped but didn't turn around. If we wanted to, if we were willing to work with you, what would that look like? It would look like you treating me with the respect you'd show any other company owner. It would look like you acknowledging that my success is real and my methods are valid. It would look like you never again suggesting that I'm not worthy of being part of this family. And if we can do that, I turned to face them one final time. Two grown men standing in the rain at their father's grave, their entire worldview shattered by a 10-minute phone call. Then maybe we can start over. As business associates, if not as siblings. What about as family? Quote, Marcus asked quietly. You declared me not family anymore, remember? That was your choice. If you want to undo it, you'll have to convince me that you actually mean it this time. I got in my car and drove away, leaving them standing in Greenlawn Cemetery with their father's body and their broken assumptions. In my rearview mirror, I could see them talking intensely, probably trying to figure out how their struggling artist half-sister had just acquired their family's $75 million company with a single phone call. The truth was, I'd been planning this acquisition for months. Not out of spite or revenge, but because Castillo Development really was undervalued and positioned for growth. The timing of making the offer at Dad's funeral was purely emotional, triggered by my brothers' cruel dismissal, and their declaration that I wasn't family anymore. But sometimes the best business decisions come from the worst personal moments. And sometimes the people who underestimate you the most end up giving you the greatest gift of all, the motivation to prove them spectacularly wrong. As I drove through the Phoenix streets toward my hotel, my phone buzzed with messages from Margaret's team. Legal documents to review, due diligence schedules to approve, transition timelines to confirm. By Friday, I would own the company my father had spent 40 years building, and my brothers would have to decide whether their pride was worth more than their careers. The rain was stopping, and patches of sunlight were beginning to break through the clouds. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, difficult conversations, and the complex process of integrating a major acquisition into my investment portfolio. But tonight, I was going to order room service, open a bottle of wine, and paint. Because despite everything that had happened, despite the family drama and the business complexities and the emotional upheaval of losing my father, I was still an artist at heart. And now I was an artist who happened to own a $75 million construction company. Sometimes life has a sense of humor about these things. The phone rang as I was pulling into the hotel valet area. Margaret again, probably with more updates about the acquisition timeline. Sarah, I have news. Good news or bad news? Interesting news. The board meeting went longer than expected because there was some internal discussion about the offer. What kind of discussion? Apparently your brothers had some very strong opinions about the sale. I handed my keys to the valet and walked toward the hotel entrance, phone pressed to my ear. I'm sure they did. They're requesting an emergency meeting with you tonight. They want to discuss the terms before you finalize the paperwork. What terms? It's a straightforward acquisition. That's what I told them. But they seem to think there's room for negotiation. I paused in the hotel lobby considering. Part of me wanted to refuse the meeting, to proceed with the acquisition exactly as planned and let them deal with the consequences of their earlier behavior. But another part of me was curious about what they thought they could possibly negotiate at this point. Set it up, I said finally, but here at the hotel, 9 p.m. in my suite. I'll let them know. And Margaret? Make sure they understand that this isn't a negotiation about the sale. That's happening regardless. If they want to meet, it's to discuss their future with the company. Understood. I rode the elevator to the presidential suite, already mentally preparing for what would undoubtedly be a difficult conversation. In a few hours, I would be sitting across from the two men who had just declared me unworthy of family status, discussing whether they wanted to keep their jobs under my ownership. The irony was almost poetic, but first I had calls to make, emails to answer, and legal documents to review. Because whatever happened tonight, whatever my brothers decided about their future, I was now responsible for a major acquisition and all the complexities that came with it. The rain had stopped completely by the time I reached my suite. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the Phoenix skyline sprawling in all directions, punctuated by construction cranes working on new developments. Some of those projects were probably Castillo Development buildings, which meant they would soon be my projects. I set up my laptop on the dining table and began reviewing the preliminary acquisition documents Margaret's team had sent. Everything looked standard, professional, exactly what I'd expected. By Friday afternoon, assuming due diligence didn't reveal any major issues, I would be the majority owner of my father's company. The company that had never quite known what to do with his artistic daughter was about to be owned by that same daughter. Sometimes the universe has a sense of justice about these things. At 8:30, I changed into more formal clothes, professional attire that would remind Daniel and Marcus that they were now dealing with a serious businesswoman, not the family disappointment they'd dismissed at the cemetery. When the knock came at 9 p.m. precisely, I was ready. They stood in the hallway looking uncertain, their earlier confidence completely evaporated. Both had changed out of their funeral clothes into business suits, probably hoping to reclaim some sense of authority through familiar armor. "Come in," I said, stepping aside to let them enter. They walked into the suite with the careful movements of men who no longer understood the rules of engagement. The presidential suite was larger than most people's apartments, with separate living and dining areas, a full kitchen, and panoramic views of the city. It was exactly the kind of display of wealth they'd accused me of lacking just hours earlier. "Nice room," Marcus said awkwardly. "It serves its purpose." We settled into the living area, me in an armchair that put me at a slight advantage, them on the sofa like supplicants seeking an audience. The power dynamic had shifted so completely that even the seating arrangement felt symbolic. "You wanted to meet," I said simply. "So let's meet." Daniel cleared his throat, obviously having prepared some kind of speech. "Sarah, we think there might have been some misunderstanding earlier." "What kind of misunderstanding?" "About the family situation. About Dad's will. About your status." "You were very clear about my status. You said I wasn't family anymore." "We were upset," Marcus said quickly. "Grief makes people say things they don't mean." "Do you mean it now?" They exchanged glances, clearly not having anticipated the directness of the question. "Mean what?" Daniel asked. "That I am family. That I belong. That my choices and my success are valid and worthy of respect." Another silence. These were hard questions for men who had spent years believing their half-sister was a disappointment. "We're saying we might have been hasty," Daniel said finally. "Hasty?" I repeated, letting the word hang in the air between us. "You were hasty when you declared me not family anymore at our father's grave." "Look, Sarah." Marcus leaned forward, his hands clasped together. "We've been thinking about what happened today, and maybe we overreacted." "Maybe. The thing is," Daniel continued, "we didn't know about your financial situation. We thought you were struggling, and we were trying to protect Dad's legacy." "Protect it from what?" "From someone who might not understand the business, who might make decisions that could hurt the company or the employees." I studied their faces, looking for genuine remorse, or just calculated damage control. "And now that you know I have money, suddenly I'm qualified to understand business?" "It's not about the money," Marcus said, though we all knew that was exactly what it was about. "It's about capability, about experience." "I see. So when you thought I was poor, I was incapable. Now that you know I'm wealthy, I might have some capability. Is that the logic?" Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "You have to understand our perspective. Dad built that company from nothing. He started with one truck and a handful of tools. And he turned it into one of the largest development firms in Arizona. We've been part of that growth for our entire careers. And I haven't been, right. You chose a different path. I was pushed toward a different path. There's a difference." The distinctions seemed to confuse them, as if they couldn't imagine that their dismissal of my interests had influenced my career choices. "Dad always said you were creative," Marcus offered, like it was some kind of concession. "He respected that about you. He told me creativity was fine as a hobby but worthless as a career. He was protecting you. The art world is unpredictable, difficult to succeed in. Unlike construction, which is famously stable and predictable." Daniel caught the sarcasm. "Construction has cycles, but it's based on real demand for real products. People need buildings, infrastructure, homes. Art is more subjective. And yet here we are, with me buying your construction company using money I made from art and art-related investments. They had no response to that. The evidence of my success was sitting in front of them in the form of acquisition documents and legal papers spread across the coffee table. My phone buzzed with another message from Margaret. I glanced at it quickly. Due diligence team has completed preliminary review. No red flags. Proceeding with final documentation. I showed them the message. Your company passed the first round of due diligence. Congratulations. Sarah, Daniel said urgently, before this goes any further, we need to talk about what happens next. What happens next is that I become the owner of Castillo Development on Friday afternoon, assuming everything continues to check out. And then what? You fire us? Bring in your own management team? Liquidate everything? Why would I do any of those things? Because we hurt your feelings today. Because we said things we shouldn't have said. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Daniel, if I made business decisions based on hurt feelings, I wouldn't have a $150 million portfolio. I'm buying your company because it's a good investment, not because I want revenge. But you must want something, Marcus said. Some kind of satisfaction, some way to prove you were right and we were wrong. I don't need to prove anything. The acquisition is proof enough. Then why did you make the offer today? Why at Dad's funeral, right after we had that conversation? It was a fair question, and they deserved an honest answer. Because you declared me not family anymore. Because you decided that my success was imaginary, and my choices were worthless. Because you treated me like a stranger at my own father's funeral. I paused, making sure they understood the weight of what came next. And because I realized I don't want to be part of a family that sees me that way, but I do want to be part of the business Dad built. As the owner. As the owner. Daniel ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from childhood when he was frustrated or overwhelmed. This is insane. This morning we were planning Dad's funeral. Tonight you own our company. I don't own it yet. But I will. And you really want us to work for you? I want competent management for my investment. If that's you two, great. If not, I'll find someone else. Marcus stood up and walked to the windows, looking out at the city lights. What would the working relationship look like? Professional. You'd report to me the same way you reported to Dad. I'd expect regular updates on projects, financial performance, strategic initiatives. You'd make operational decisions within the parameters I set, and you'd consult with me on major strategic moves. And the Arts Foundation thing you mentioned? That's non-negotiable. Castillo Development will have a robust community engagement program focused on supporting local artists and arts education. Dad would roll over in his grave, Marcus said quietly. Dad's been dead for 12 hours. His opinions about art are no longer relevant to how I run my company. The bluntness of it made them both flinch, but it needed to be said. They were still thinking of this as their father's company, as if his preferences should continue to guide decisions indefinitely. What about profit margins? Daniel asked. Arts programs cost money. So do executive bonuses, company cars, and country club memberships. We'll find the budget. You're serious about the employee profit sharing too? Completely serious. The people who build the buildings should share in the success of the company. That's not how construction works. It's how my construction company will work. Daniel rejoined the conversation from his position by the window. What if we can't adapt to your way of doing business? Then you'll find other jobs. The construction industry in Phoenix is large enough to accommodate your skills. But not at this level. Not with this kind of responsibility. That's true. Castillo Development is one of the premier firms in the Southwest. If you want to maintain that level of professional status, you'll need to work with me. And if we do work with you, Marcus said slowly, what does that mean for our personal relationship? What personal relationship? The question caught him off guard. We're still siblings. Are we? Because this afternoon you declared that we weren't family anymore. You can't take that back just because the business situation changed. People say things in grief. People reveal their true feelings in grief. You told me exactly what you thought of me when you thought it didn't matter. Now it matters, so you want to take it back. Daniel returned to the sofa, leaning forward intently. Sarah, we made a mistake today. We were wrong about you, wrong about your success, wrong about your capabilities. Can't we just acknowledge that and move forward? You can acknowledge it. Whether I accept the acknowledgement is up to me. What would it take? For what? For you to forgive us. For us to be a family again. I considered the question seriously. What would it take? Years of dismissal and condescension couldn't be erased with a single apology, no matter how sincere. But perhaps they could be overcome with consistent changed behavior over time. It would take you treating me with the same respect you'd show any successful businesswoman. It would take you never again suggesting that my choices are frivolous or my success is accidental. It would take you accepting that I built something real and valuable, and that I did it without your help or approval. We can do that. Can you? Because this morning, you couldn't even conceive that I might have money. You were so convinced of my failure that you declared me not family rather than question your assumptions. Marcus sat back down, his expression thoughtful. You're right. We had a fixed idea of who you were, and we never updated it based on new information. You never sought new information. When's the last time either of you asked me about my work? Not to criticize it, but to actually understand what I do. They had no answer because they'd never asked. In their minds, I was permanently frozen as the impractical teenager who wanted to major in art instead of business. I sell paintings to private collectors, I continued. I invest in early-stage companies that show promise for sustainable growth. I consult with businesses on creative problem-solving and aesthetic decision-making. I've been featured in Forbes, Art in America, and the Wall Street Journal. I sit on the boards of 3 museums and 2 venture capital firms. We didn't know any of that, Daniel said quietly, because you didn't want to know. It was easier to maintain your narrative about the struggling artist's sister than to acknowledge that I might have succeeded. My phone rang. Margaret again. Sarah, I have the final terms from the legal team. Everything looks good for a Friday closing. Do you want to review the documents tonight or first thing in the morning? Send them to my email. I'll review them tonight. Perfect. Oh, and the management team meeting you requested for tomorrow morning? Both Daniel and Marcus Castillo have confirmed their attendance. I looked at my brothers. Did you tell Margaret you'd be at tomorrow's meeting? We called her office after the board meeting, Daniel admitted. We wanted to understand the timeline. And what did you learn? That you're not bluffing, that you really do have the resources to buy the company, that this is happening whether we like it or not. Good. At least we're all operating from the same set of facts now. Margaret was still on the phone. Sarah, is there anything specific you want me to prepare for tomorrow's meeting? Standard transition materials. Organizational charts, financial summaries, project timelines. I want to understand exactly what I'm buying. I'll have everything ready. One more thing. The current ownership structure shows that your father owned 60% of the company, with Daniel and Marcus each holding 20%. I looked at my brothers with new interest. You own shares in the company? Dad gave them to us when we joined the firm, Marcus said. Performance incentives. So you're not just employees, you're minority shareholders. Yes, which means you'll be selling your shares to me as part of the acquisition. Daniel nodded reluctantly. That's what the lawyers explained. Margaret, I said into the phone, what's the valuation on the minority shares? Based on the overall purchase price, approximately $15 million each, $30 million total for their combined 40% stake. Not a bad consolation prize for being fired from the family. Did you hear that? I asked my brothers after hanging up. We heard. So even if you decide not to work for me, you'll walk away with $15 million each. It's not about the money, Daniel said. Isn't it? This morning you were worried I might contest Dad's will and try to take money I didn't deserve. Tonight you're each getting $15 million you didn't expect. We worked for those shares. I'm not saying you didn't. I'm pointing out the irony. Marcus was staring at the acquisition documents spread across the coffee table. This is really happening. This is really happening. And you really want us to stay on as employees? I want competent management. If you can provide that while treating me with appropriate respect, then yes, I want you to stay. What if we can't? Then you'll have $15 million each to start your own firm or retire or do whatever you want. You'll be fine either way. Daniel picked up one of the legal documents, scanning the terms. You're paying a premium for the company. I'm paying market rate for a quality investment. Dad built it well. Yes, he did. That's why I want to own it. Are you going to change the name? The question caught me by surprise. I hadn't thought about the company name, but it was an important consideration. Castillo Development carried significant brand recognition in the Phoenix market. Why would I change it? Because it's Dad's name. Because you might want your own brand on the company. The Castillo name has value in this market. It represents quality, reliability, completion on time and under budget. Why would I throw that away? Because it's not your name. It's my name too, Daniel. I'm also a Castillo. The reminder seemed to hit him physically. He'd been so focused on the business implications that he'd forgotten we shared the same surname. Right. Of course. Besides, changing the company name would confuse clients and vendors. It would require rebranding costs and might hurt our competitive position. From a business perspective, keeping the name makes sense. Our competitive position, Marcus repeated. It's going to be my company. That makes it our competitive position if you choose to stay on. And if we choose not to? Then it's my competitive position and your former employees who happen to make a nice profit on your equity stakes. A knock at the door interrupted our conversation. Room service with the dinner I'd ordered earlier, forgotten in the intensity of the business discussion. Are you hungry? I asked as the server set up the meal on the dining table. We should probably get going, Daniel said. Sit down and eat. We're not done talking, and you both look like you haven't had a real meal today. They joined me at the dining table somewhat reluctantly, as if sharing a meal might imply agreement to terms they weren't ready to accept. Can I ask you something? Marcus said as we began eating. Ask. Why didn't you ever tell Dad about your success? He would have been proud of you. The question hit deeper than I'd expected. Why hadn't I told him? Pride, partly. Stubbornness. A desire to prove I didn't need his approval, but also fear that even my success wouldn't be enough to change his opinion of my choices. I tried, in the beginning, but every conversation became a lecture about practical careers and financial security. Eventually, I stopped trying. He asked about you sometimes. What did he say? He worried that you were struggling. He wanted to help, but he didn't know how to reach out without seeming like he was interfering. He could have started by asking about my work instead of criticizing it. Dad wasn't good at admitting he was wrong about things. None of us are. We ate in relative silence for a few minutes, each lost in our own thoughts about family dynamics and missed opportunities. What was the first painting you sold? Daniel asked eventually. A landscape of the desert outside Tucson. I painted it during my senior year of college. A professor saw it in the student exhibition and introduced me to a collector who was building a Southwestern art collection. How much did you get for it? $500. I thought I was rich. And now you're buying companies with pocket change. It didn't happen overnight. It took years of careful investing, smart partnerships, and a lot of luck. And talent, Marcus added quietly. Some talent, yes. Dad always said you were the most creative person he knew. He also said creativity wouldn't pay the bills. Maybe he was wrong about that. Maybe he was wrong about a lot of things. My phone buzzed with an email from Margaret's team. The final acquisition documents, ready for my review and signature. The paperwork is here, I announced, opening my laptop. Would you like to see what it looks like when someone buys your family's company? They both leaned in as I scrolled through the documents. Purchase agreement, asset transfer forms, employment transition agreements, escrow instructions. Dozens of pages that would transfer ownership of 40 years of work from one generation to the next. It's very thorough, Daniel observed. Margaret's team doesn't miss details. What happens tomorrow at the meeting? I meet with the current management team, which includes both of you, to discuss transition plans and operational continuity. As the new owner. Marcus set down his fork, his appetite apparently gone. This is the strangest day of my life. Funeral to acquisition in 12 hours. I agreed. It's been eventful. Are you really going to sign those documents tonight? I'm going to review them tonight. I'll sign them tomorrow after the management meeting, assuming everything looks good. And if it doesn't look good, then I'll walk away and you'll keep running the company the way you always have. But you don't think that's likely? No, I don't think that's likely. Daniel stood up and walked back to the windows, a habit of his when he needed to think. The city sprawled below us, construction projects dotted throughout the landscape like promises of future growth. Some of those buildings down there, we built them, he said. I know. Dad was proud of the work we did. He used to drive around the city pointing out Castillo Development projects to anyone who would listen. I remember. He'd want the company to continue, to keep building, to keep growing. I plan to keep building and growing, with the Arts Foundation and the profit sharing and all the changes you mentioned. Those aren't obstacles to growth, Daniel. They're investments in long-term sustainability and community engagement. Dad wouldn't see it that way. Dad's not making the decisions anymore. Marcus joined his brother at the windows. What if we said yes? What if we agreed to work for you? What would that actually look like day to day? It would look like running a construction company. You'd manage projects, oversee crews, handle client relationships, negotiate contracts. The same things you do now. But reporting to you instead of being owners. You'd still be owners. Minority owners, but owners nonetheless. I'm buying majority control, not 100% of the company. Margaret said we were selling our shares. That was one option. Another option is that you maintain your equity positions, but I acquire majority control through a capital injection and share dilution. Both brothers turned from the window to stare at me. What does that mean exactly? Daniel asked. It means I invest capital in the company in exchange for newly issued shares that give me majority control. Your existing shares retain their value, but your percentage ownership decreases. So we'd still own part of the company? About 15% each, down from 20%. But 15% of a larger, better capitalized company might be worth more than 20% of the current company. You didn't mention that option before. You didn't ask. You assumed I wanted to buy you out completely. Marcus was doing calculations in his head. If you're investing $75 million in new capital, that would significantly increase the company's value. Significantly increase its capacity for growth, yes. And we'd still be part owners. Junior partners, but partners nonetheless. Why would you do that instead of buying us out? Because owner-managers are more motivated than employee managers. Because you know the business better than anyone I could hire. Because keeping you invested in the company's success benefits everyone. Daniel returned to the dining table, his expression thoughtful. That's a very different proposition. It's the same proposition I've been making all evening. I want to own and operate this company. I want competent management to help me do that. If you're willing to work with me, I'm willing to work with you. As partners. As junior partners. I'd still have final authority on major decisions. But we'd have input. You'd have input, equity stakes, and the potential for significant returns if the company grows the way I think it can. Marcus sat back down, his energy shifting. Tell us about your growth plans. Sustainable development projects, mixed-use communities, affordable housing initiatives, commercial spaces with integrated art installations. Phoenix is growing rapidly, and there's demand for innovative approaches to urban development. Dad always focused on traditional office buildings and strip malls. Traditional projects are stable and profitable. But they're also commoditized. Every construction company can build a strip mall. Not every company can build communities that enhance quality of life while generating strong returns. And you think Castillo Development can do that? I think Castillo Development has the reputation, the relationships, and the operational excellence to do whatever we decide to do. The question is whether we want to be followers or leaders in the next phase of Phoenix's growth. Daniel was nodding slowly. That's actually compelling. It's why I wanted to buy the company. Not for revenge, not to prove a point, but because I see potential that's not being realized under current management. Meaning Dad's management. Meaning conservative management that prioritizes steady returns over strategic growth. Nothing wrong with steady returns, Marcus pointed out. Nothing wrong with strategic growth either. The best companies do both. My laptop chimed with another email. Margaret again, with additional information about the acquisition timeline. The lawyers want to schedule final document signing for Friday at noon. I read aloud. That gives us the morning management meeting to work out any final details. And if we decide we want the partnership structure instead of the buyout, then we modify the documents accordingly. Margaret's team can make those changes overnight. You'd really rather have us as partners than employees? I'd rather have you as motivated partners than reluctant employees. Daniel and Marcus exchanged a long look, some silent communication passing between them. We need to talk, Daniel said finally. About what? About whether we can work with you. About whether we can adapt to your way of doing business. About whether we can treat you as the company owner instead of our little sister. Half-sister? I corrected. You made that distinction very clear this afternoon. Sarah? Marcus said quietly. We were wrong this afternoon. About everything. About your success, about your capabilities, about your value to this family. And we're sorry. Sorry enough to change how you see me? Sorry enough to work for me if that's what I decide? Sorry enough to respect my decisions even when you disagree with them? Yes. We'll see. What does that mean? It means apologies are easy when someone holds the power to fire you. Consistent, respectful behavior over time is harder but more meaningful. Daniel nodded. Fair enough. So what happens now? Marcus asked. Now you go home and think about whether you want to be part of my company. Tomorrow morning we have a professional meeting to discuss the transition. Tomorrow afternoon I sign the documents that make me the majority owner. Everything else is details. They stood to leave, gathering their coats and preparing to return to a world that had been fundamentally altered in the span of a single day. Sarah, Daniel said at the door, for what it's worth, Dad would be proud of what you've accomplished. Would he? I think so. He respected success, even when he didn't understand how it was achieved. Maybe. We'll never know for sure. No, we won't. After they left, I settled back at my laptop to review the acquisition documents in detail. Margaret's team had done excellent work, covering every conceivable contingency and protecting my interests, without being unnecessarily punitive to the existing management. The partnership structure they had suggested was actually more appealing than I'd initially indicated. Keeping Daniel and Marcus invested in the company's success would align their incentives with mine, and their operational expertise would be valuable as I implemented new strategic directions. But the personal relationship remained complicated. Could we really transition from siblings to business partners? Could they really accept me as their boss after years of treating me as the family disappointment? Time would tell. But for now, I had a company to buy and a business to transform. I signed the preliminary documents and sent them back to Margaret's team. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight had settled the fundamental question. I was going to own Castillo Development, and my brothers could either adapt to that reality or find new careers. Either way, the struggling artist they'd dismissed at our father's funeral was about to become their employer. Sometimes justice has a sense of timing about these things. The next morning arrived with typical Phoenix clarity. Bright desert sunlight streaming through the hotel suite windows. I'd been awake since 5, reviewing financial projections and strategic plans for Castillo Development's future. The management meeting was scheduled for 9, and I wanted to be thoroughly prepared for what would likely be a complex discussion. Margaret arrived at 8:30 with her legal team, 3 sharp-dressed attorneys carrying briefcases that probably cost more than most people's cars. They spread documents across the dining table with military precision, transforming my breakfast area into a temporary corporate boardroom. Everything's in order, Margaret announced, adjusting her reading glasses as she reviewed the final paperwork. The partnership structure we discussed last night is ready to implement, if that's the direction you choose. And the full acquisition option? Also ready. We can execute either structure within an hour of your decision. Perfect. A knock at the door announced the arrival of Daniel and Marcus, both dressed in their finest business attire. They entered the suite with the careful demeanor of men who understood they were walking into a meeting that would determine their professional futures. Gentlemen, Margaret greeted them with professional courtesy. Please, have a seat. We arranged ourselves around the dining table, the acquisition documents serving as a stark reminder of the power shift that had occurred overnight. I sat at the head of the table, a position that would have been unthinkable 24 hours earlier. Before we begin, I said, I want to establish some ground rules for this meeting. We're here to discuss business, not family dynamics. Everyone in this room is a professional with valuable expertise. I expect that expertise to guide our conversation. Daniel nodded. Understood. Good. Margaret, would you please explain the current status of the acquisition? Margaret opened the primary folder and began her presentation. Castillo Development has passed all preliminary due diligence requirements. Financial records are clean, project timelines are realistic, and client relationships appear stable. From an investment perspective, this is a solid acquisition target. What about operational concerns? I asked. The company has strong market position but limited growth strategy. Current management has focused on maintaining existing client relationships rather than expanding into new markets or service areas. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Dad preferred steady growth over aggressive expansion. Nothing wrong with steady growth, Margaret replied diplomatically, but it does limit upside potential. Which brings us to the question of future management structure. I continued. I've prepared 2 options for moving forward. I pulled out 2 separate sets of documents. Option 1 is a complete acquisition. I purchase 100% of the company. Daniel and Marcus receive cash payments for their equity stakes, and they become employees under my management. And option 2? Daniel asked. Option 2 is a partnership structure. I make a significant capital investment in exchange for majority control, but Daniel and Marcus retain minority ownership positions. Instead of employees, they become junior partners. The room fell silent as they processed the implications. What would the equity split look like under option 2? Marcus asked. Margaret consulted her notes. Sarah would hold 60% ownership. Daniel and Marcus would each retain 15%. Leaving 10% unaccounted for, Daniel observed. Employee stock options, I explained. 10% of the company reserved for performance-based equity grants to key personnel. That's innovative, Marcus admitted. It's effective. People work harder when they have ownership stakes in the outcome. Margaret continued her presentation. Under the partnership structure, Daniel and Marcus would maintain their current operational roles, but report to Sarah on strategic decisions. They'd participate in profit distributions based on their equity percentages. And under the acquisition structure, Daniel asked, you'd receive approximately $15 million each for your current stakes, and transition to employee status with competitive salaries and performance bonuses. The financial implications were clear. Partnership meant ongoing ownership and unlimited upside potential. Employment meant immediate cash but no future equity participation. There's one more consideration, I added. Under either structure, I'll be implementing the community engagement programs we discussed yesterday. Arts Foundation, employee profit sharing, sustainable development initiatives. Those will impact margins, Marcus pointed out. Initially, yes. Long-term, they'll differentiate us from competitors and open new market opportunities. Margaret pulled out a market analysis report. Companies with strong community engagement programs typically see increased client loyalty, improved employee retention, and enhanced brand recognition. The initial investment usually pays for itself within 18 months. Assuming the programs are well executed, Daniel said. Assuming they are. I agreed, which is why I need experienced management who understand both the construction business and the local market. Meaning us, Marcus said. Meaning you. If you're interested and capable. Daniel leaned back in his chair, studying the documents spread across the table. Can I ask you something directly? Ask. Are you doing this to punish us for yesterday? Is this some elaborate revenge scheme? The question deserved a direct answer. Daniel, if I wanted revenge, I'd buy the company, fire both of you, and run it into the ground just to watch you suffer. That would cost me $75 million and destroy everything Dad built. I'm not interested in expensive revenge. Then why? Because Castillo Development is a good company with unrealized potential. Because I have the capital and vision to unlock that potential. Because construction companies that embrace innovative approaches to community development are going to dominate the next phase of urban growth. Margaret nodded in agreement. The demographics support that analysis. Phoenix is adding 50,000 new residents annually, and they're increasingly demanding sustainable, community-oriented development projects. Which brings me to my final point, I continued. I don't need your permission to buy this company. I don't need your approval of my plans. I don't need your forgiveness for yesterday's conversation. What I need is a decision about whether you want to be part of what comes next. And if we decide we don't? Marcus asked. Then you'll receive your cash payments, I'll hire new management, and you'll compete against me in the marketplace. Phoenix is large enough for multiple construction firms, but not large enough for multiple firms with your level of capital backing, Daniel observed. Probably not. The room fell quiet again as they processed the reality of their situation. They could take their money and start over, but they'd be competing against their own former company backed by virtually unlimited resources. What's your timeline for a decision? Daniel asked. I'm signing acquisition documents at noon regardless of which structure we choose. You have until then to decide whether you want to be partners or competitors. That's not much time. It's enough time. You know the business, you know your own capabilities, and you know what I'm offering. The decision isn't complicated. Margaret checked her watch. We should probably discuss operational transition plans regardless of which structure you choose. Agreed. I pulled out another set of documents. I've prepared preliminary plans for the next 12 months. The plans were comprehensive. New project types focusing on mixed-use development, expansion into sustainable construction methods, establishment of the Arts Foundation, and implementation of employee ownership programs. This is ambitious, Marcus said, scanning the timeline. It's necessary. The construction industry is evolving rapidly. Companies that don't adapt get left behind. Dad always said slow and steady wins the race. Dad built a successful regional firm. I want to build a model for the future of urban development. Daniel was studying the financial projections. These revenue targets are aggressive. They're achievable with proper execution and adequate capital investment. Which you're providing. Which I'm providing. Margaret interjected with additional market data. Similar companies in comparable markets have achieved these growth rates within 18 months of implementing comparable strategies. Examples? Marcus asked. Margaret rattled off case studies from Denver, Austin, and Seattle. Construction firms that had embraced community-oriented development and seen dramatic growth in both revenue and market share. The common factor in all these success stories, she concluded, is adequate capital backing during the transition period. Most companies fail at this kind of transformation because they can't afford the initial investment required. But we can, I said simply. You can, Daniel corrected. We can, if you choose the partnership structure. The distinction was important. Under partnership, it would be our success or failure. Under acquisition, it would be my success with them as hired help. There's something else we should discuss, Marcus said. What happens to the company culture? Dad built a certain way of doing business, certain relationships with clients and subcontractors. What aspects of that culture do you think are worth preserving? Integrity. Completing projects on time and under budget. Taking care of employees. All excellent values that align with my plans. And what aspects would you change? Risk aversion. Resistance to innovation. Viewing community engagement as optional rather than essential. Daniel nodded slowly. Those are fair criticisms. They're not criticisms, they're opportunities for improvement. Margaret checked her watch again. We should probably move toward a decision. The legal team needs time to finalize whichever structure you choose. I looked at my brothers, these two men, who had been so certain of their superiority just 24 hours earlier. Now they sat across from me weighing whether to accept me as their business partner or become my competitors. Final questions before you decide? I asked. Just one, Daniel said. If we choose partnership, if we agree to work with you, can we really get past yesterday? Can we really function as business partners after everything that's been said? It was the question that mattered most, the one that would determine whether this arrangement could actually work long term. That depends on you, I answered honestly. I've proven I can succeed without your approval or support. The question is whether you can work with someone you used to dismiss. We don't dismiss you anymore. Because I have money now. Because I hold power over your careers. That's not the same as genuine respect. Marcus leaned forward intently. What would genuine respect look like to you? It would look like you valuing my input because of my expertise, not my bank account. It would look like you acknowledging that different approaches to success are equally valid. It would look like you treating me as a competent business leader, not your little sister who got lucky. Can you treat us as competent partners instead of the brothers who hurt your feelings? I already am. If I were making decisions based on hurt feelings, you wouldn't be sitting at this table. Daniel stood up and walked to the windows, his thinking pose that I remembered from childhood. Marcus remained seated, studying the partnership documents with increasing interest. The employee profit-sharing program, Marcus said. How would that work practically? Quarterly distributions based on company performance, allocated according to length of service and individual contribution metrics. That's going to cost significant money. It's going to motivate significant performance improvements. Profit-sharing programs typically pay for themselves through increased productivity and reduced turnover. And the Arts Foundation? Community grants for emerging artists, exhibition spaces in our buildings, partnerships with local schools and galleries. Initial budget of $2 million annually. $2 million? Daniel turned from the windows. That's a substantial commitment. It's a substantial opportunity. Companies with strong community engagement profiles win more public contracts, attract better employees, and generate more client referrals. Margaret nodded in agreement. The data consistently supports community engagement as a business strategy, not just a charitable expense. Plus, I added, it's the right thing to do. Success creates obligations to the community that enable that success. Dad never saw it that way. Dad was a product of his generation. We can choose to be products of ours. The room fell silent again, as they processed not just the business implications but the philosophical differences my approach represented. Time, Margaret announced. We need a decision. Daniel returned to the table and looked directly at me. If we do this, if we choose partnership, you need to understand something. We've been running this company for years. We know the clients, the subcontractors, the municipal officials. We know which inspectors are flexible and which ones are by the book. We know the local market in ways that can't be learned from reports. I'm counting on that expertise. Then you need to value it even when we disagree with your new direction. I need you to present your concerns professionally and accept my final decisions gracefully. And you need to make those decisions based on business logic, not personal vindication. Agreed. Marcus looked up from the partnership documents. I want specific language about operational autonomy. If we're partners, we need authority to run day-to-day operations without micromanagement. Within strategic parameters I establish. Within reasonable strategic parameters we agree on. The negotiation was happening in real time, which was probably healthy. Better to work out expectations now than discover conflicts later. Margaret, I said, can you add language about operational autonomy and strategic oversight to the partnership agreement? Easily. What about decision-making authority on major expenditures? Anything over $200,000 requires my approval, I said. $500,000. Daniel countered. $300,000 and we agree on a quarterly review process for budget allocations. Done. Margaret was taking notes rapidly, documenting the terms we were negotiating. Her legal team was already preparing to draft the modified partnership agreement. Anything else? I asked. Exit provisions. Marcus said. If this doesn't work out, if we can't function as partners, what happens to our equity stakes? Standard buy-sell agreement. If any partner wants to exit, the remaining partners have first right of refusal at fair market value. Determined how? Independent business valuation, averaged across 3 qualified appraisers. That's fair? Daniel agreed. Margaret made additional notes. I'll include standard dispute resolution procedures as well. Mediation first, then arbitration if necessary. Hopefully it won't come to that, I said. Hopefully not, Marcus agreed, but it's good to have procedures in place. I checked the time on my phone. 11:15. 45 minutes until the final signing deadline. Decision time. I announced. Daniel and Marcus exchanged one final look, that silent communication I'd observed between them since childhood. Partnership, Daniel said finally. Partnership, Marcus confirmed. Excellent. Margaret signaled to her legal team, who immediately began assembling the appropriate documents. We'll have the partnership agreement ready for signature within 30 minutes. What happens next? Marcus asked. Next, we become business partners. Next, we transform Castillo Development into something bigger and better than what Dad built. Next, we prove that family businesses can evolve and thrive across generations. And personally? Daniel asked. What happens to our relationship as siblings? That's going to take time to rebuild. But working together successfully might be a good place to start. Might be. Margaret's team worked with impressive efficiency, modifying documents and printing final versions while we discussed immediate transition plans. By 11:45, everything was ready for signature. Before we sign, I said, standing at the head of the table, I want to say something to both of you. They looked up expectantly. Yesterday at Dad's funeral, you declared me not family anymore. Today we're becoming business partners. That's either ironic or poetic, depending on your perspective. What's your perspective? Marcus asked. My gray perspective is that family relationships are complicated, but business relationships can be straightforward. We know how to be professionals even when we're struggling to be siblings. And maybe being good business partners will help us become better siblings, Daniel suggested. Maybe. Or maybe we'll discover we work better as partners than as family. Either way, we'll find out together. Margaret handed each of us identical sets of documents. Partnership agreement, capital investment terms, operational procedures, equity distribution schedules. Dozens of pages that would govern our professional relationship for years to come. Any final questions before we sign? She asked. Just one, I said, looking at my brothers. Are you ready to work for someone you used to call a failure? Are you ready to work with people who used to call you that? Daniel replied. I've been ready my whole life. We signed the documents in sequence, each signature transferring power, creating obligations, and establishing new relationships. When the last page was complete, Margaret gathered everything into leather portfolios for each partner. Congratulations, she said formally. You are now the proud owners of Castillo Development. Partners, Marcus corrected. Partners, she agreed. I stood up and extended my hand to Daniel, then to Marcus. Professional handshakes to mark the beginning of a professional relationship. Welcome to the future of Castillo Development, I said. Welcome to the family business, Daniel replied. Welcome to the next chapter, Marcus added. As Margaret and her team packed up their materials and prepared to leave, I looked around the hotel suite that had served as our temporary boardroom. 24 hours earlier, I'd been the dismissed daughter at my father's funeral. Now I was the majority owner of his company and business partner to the brothers who had declared me not family. Life has a way of surprising you sometimes. What now? Marcus asked as we prepared to leave. Now we go to the office and tell the staff they have new ownership. Now we begin implementing the changes that will transform this company. Now we start building something that would make Dad proud, even if he wouldn't have understood it. Think he's watching this somehow? Daniel asked. If he is, I hope he's finally realizing that creativity and business success aren't mutually exclusive. I think he'd be proud of all of us, Marcus said quietly. Maybe. We'll have to be proud enough for all of us. We left the hotel together, 3 partners in a newly restructured company, heading toward an uncertain but promising future. The struggling artist they'd dismissed at our father's grave was now their boss, their partner, and quite possibly their salvation. Sometimes the best revenge is massive success. Sometimes it's not revenge at all, just justice finally catching up to truth. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it's the beginning of something better than what came before. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.